The morning Tessa found out she was pregnant, she made coffee the way she always did. 2 scoops, no sugar, standing at the kitchen window in her socks while the sun came up over the rooftops on Elmwood Avenue. She stood there longer than usual that morning, holding the mug with both hands, watching a neighbor she didn't know the name of scrape frost off his windshield. There was something about the ordinary stillness of it, the world just going on. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach, still not quite believing what the test on the bathroom counter had told her 20 minutes ago. She was 31 years old, a senior architectural designer at Carver & Lund in downtown Ottawa, and she had been with Damien for 3 years. 3 years of Sunday farmers markets and long drives up to the Gatineau Hills in autumn, and every single argument eventually resolved on the same couch, with the same blanket pulled over both of them. She had believed, with the kind of quiet certainty she rarely let herself feel, that this was it, that he was it. She didn't tell him right away. She held it for 2 days, just herself and this secret, and in those 2 days she rebuilt the whole future in her mind. A bigger apartment eventually, maybe a house in Westboro. She started mentally rearranging the spare room they used as a storage catch-all, picturing pale yellow walls. She told him on a Thursday evening while he was washing dishes. She walked up behind him and held the test out over his shoulder without saying a word. He turned off the tap, dried his hands very slowly with the dish towel, turned around. "Tessa," he said, and then nothing else for what felt like a very long time. She watched his face and felt the first small cold thing move through her chest. It wasn't the expression of a man who had just received unexpected news. It was the expression of a man who had just been caught. He said they needed to talk. He said things had been complicated lately. He said, and this was the part that she would replay for months afterward, always landing on the same detail. He said, "I don't think I can be what you need right now. Not what we need. What you need." She asked him to leave. She said it very calmly, which surprised both of them. She held the door open and she didn't cry until she heard his car pull out of the parking lot below. Her best friend Petra came over that same night, with Thai food and a bottle of sparkling water, because Petra had already done the math on what Tessa could drink. She sat on Tessa's kitchen floor, because Tessa didn't want to sit on the couch yet. It still felt like his, and she listened to the whole thing without saying anything until Tessa was done. Then Petra said, "He said you need." "Yeah, not we need. I noticed that too." They sat with it for a minute. "Okay," Petra said. "What do you want to do?" Tessa looked down at the container of pad thai in her lap. "I want to keep the baby," she said. "I know that's not the convenient answer. I didn't ask for the convenient answer." That was why Petra was her bestest friend. The weeks that followed were not graceful. Tessa threw up every morning between 6 and 8, learned to keep crackers on her nightstand, and began the exhausting process of reimagining her life without the person she had expected to share it with. She told her parents on a Sunday call. Her mom, Lynn, cried a little, and then immediately started talking about the back bedroom at their place in Kingston, as if Tessa were planning to move home, which she was not. Her dad, Frank, said almost nothing, which was how Frank handled most things, but he called her back an hour later just to say he was proud of her. She held the phone after he hung up and stared at the ceiling. Work was both the hardest and the easiest part. The hardest because she was exhausted in a bone-deep way she hadn't known was possible, and because Damien also worked in the industry. Not at her firm, but close enough that his name came up in conversations, at industry events, in emails. The easiest because when she was working, she was just herself. Tessa Aldridge, who could read a structural diagram faster than anyone else in her department, and who had just been shortlisted for the Beaumont Urban Renewal Project, which was the biggest commission their firm had pursued in a decade. She threw herself into it. She came in early, stayed late when her body would allow it, covered walls of trace paper with iterations of a design that she genuinely believed in. Her colleague James, who had the desk beside hers and had known her long enough to sense when not to ask questions, brought her tea without being asked and pretended not to notice when she rested her head on her folded arms between 8 and 8:15 every morning. She didn't think about James as anything other than a colleague. She didn't have the bandwidth. She was growing a person. She was 16 weeks along on the afternoon. She went to the radiology clinic on Spark Street for the anatomy scan. Her mom had offered to come from Kingston, but Tessa had said no. She wanted to do this one alone, or at least, that's what she told herself. She took the afternoon off, wore the soft gray cardigan she'd been living in, stopped for a decaf on the way. The waiting room was warm and slightly overlit, the kind of room that felt designed to be soothing and mostly succeeded. She sat with a magazine in her lap that she didn't read. The technician who called her name was a young woman with cheerful green earrings, and she made everything feel matter-of-fact in the best possible way, describing what she was doing, pointing out the spine, the heart, the small fist pressed against a cheek. Tessa lay there looking at the screen and felt something open up in her chest, something she didn't have words for. Love wasn't big enough. Relief wasn't right. It was more like recognition, like meeting someone you already knew. The technician printed her 2 images and put them in an envelope, and Tessa walked out into the pale October afternoon, holding them carefully with both hands. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She was thinking about calling her mom. She was thinking she might, for the first time in weeks, actually be okay. That was when she saw Damien's car. She recognized it before she registered what she was looking at. The dark green Subaru with the dent in the rear panel from where he'd backed into a bollard in a Loblaws parking lot 2 winters ago. It was parked outside the same building she had just walked out of. And Damien was there, beside the car, and he had his arm around a woman Tessa had never seen before. The woman was visibly pregnant. Damien had his hand against the small of her back, steady and familiar the way he used to stand with Tessa, and he was saying something quietly near her ear, and the woman was nodding with her head slightly bowed. The envelope slipped from Tessa's hands. She watched it fall. She watched it land flat on the pavement. She did not pick it up. She stood absolutely still on that sidewalk for what was probably 4 seconds, and felt the entire scaffolding of the last 4 months rearrange itself into something she couldn't yet name. He hadn't left because things were complicated. He hadn't left because he didn't know what he wanted. He had left because he already had somewhere else to be. Someone else who needed him. Someone else who was also. She bent down and picked up the envelope. She straightened up. She walked to the corner and turned left and kept walking until she was far enough away. And then she stood against a brick wall in a narrow side street, and she pressed the envelope against her sternum and she breathed. She didn't cry. She was almost angry with herself about that, later. But in the moment there was just this strange, cold, clarifying silence. He knew, she thought. He knew when I told him, and he already knew about her. She didn't tell anyone what she'd seen. Not that night, not the next day. She went home. She ate soup standing at the kitchen counter. She sat with her hand on her stomach and looked at the ultrasound images for a long time. Her daughter, and somehow she knew now, in the way you sometimes just know, was 6 inches long and had one fist pressed against her cheek and had no idea that her mother was currently dismantling and rebuilding her entire understanding of the last 3 years. Petra texted at 9:30. How was the scan? Tessa sent back a photo of the image. Just the image, nothing else. Petra responded with a row of hearts and then, she looks like you already. Tessa smiled in spite of everything. It was James, of all people James, who noticed something was wrong. He noticed the next morning at work, which was either a testament to how well he read people or how poorly she was hiding it, possibly both. He didn't say anything directly. He just came by her desk mid-morning with tea she hadn't asked for and set it down and said quietly, "You don't have to tell me anything. I just want you to know I'm here." She looked up at him. James Calloway, 34 years old, who made terrible puns about load-bearing walls and kept a photo of his late grandmother on his desk and had never once, in 2 years of working beside her, made her feel like anything other than exactly who she was. "I saw Damien yesterday," she said, "outside the clinic." James waited. He was with someone, a woman, also pregnant. She heard herself say it and it still sounded like something from a bad movie. "He must have been with her while he was with me, or close to it. I don't know the exact math and I don't really want to." James sat down in the chair across from her desk. He didn't perform shock. He didn't immediately offer solutions. He just sat there and let the weight of what she'd said be what it was. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You deserved none of that." "No," she agreed, "I didn't." They sat in a silence that didn't feel the way silence usually felt at work, pressured, full of things to do. This was the other kind. "Can I ask you something?" Tessa said. "Yes, did you ever suspect?" "About him?" She'd mentioned Damien at the office before, in the casual way you mention a partner, dinner plans, a weekend trip. James hesitated. "Just long enough." "I met him once," he said. "At the Carver holiday party 2 years ago. I didn't know him, but there was something. I couldn't point to it. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place." She picked up her tea. "But I kind of wish you had." He looked at her with an expression she didn't try to interpret. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't." The Beaumont project consumed the next 2 months. Tessa's design made it through the first internal review, and then the second, and somewhere in the long hours and the difficult conversations, and the drafts that didn't work and the one that finally did, she stopped thinking about Damien every day. It happened gradually, the way most important things happened. She just noticed one morning that she'd gotten through the previous day without his name entering her head once, and the absence of him felt less like a wound and more like a room she used to live in that she no longer needed. She saw a lawyer. She made sure her name was the only one on the lease, because it always had been. She had one brief, entirely businesslike exchange with Damien over email regarding a few shared items in the apartment, a lamp, a bookshelf, a cast iron pan, and she noted with distant interest that he said nothing about her pregnancy, nothing about what she'd seen outside the clinic, Nothing at all beyond the practical logistics of object retrieval. She did not bring it up either. There was nothing to say that wouldn't cost her more than it was worth. Her body was changing in ways she found alternately strange and extraordinary. She was 20 weeks, then 24, and her daughter was moving now, small rolling shifts that happened mostly in the evenings when Tessa was still, sitting on the couch with a book, or her laptop, or just her own thoughts. She found herself talking out loud sometimes, not in a performance of it, not self-consciously, just in the natural way she'd talk to herself about anything. "I'm thinking of a blue-gray for your room," she said once to her own stomach. White is honest. Petra came by on weekends. Her parents drove up from Kingston once a month, and her mom had slowly stopped suggesting Tessa move home, and had started asking more useful questions, like whether she'd found a doula yet, and what the maternity leave situation was at Carver and Lund. James and Tessa started having lunch together. Not every day, maybe twice a week, in the small park 2 blocks from the office when the weather held. They talked about work, and they talked about design theory, and they talked about the neighborhood they both lived in. He was 20 minutes from her, she discovered, in Hintonburg, and they talked sometimes about the more complicated things. His grandmother, who had raised him after his parents divorced, and who he still missed with an immediacy that surprised him. Her dad, who was not a man of many words, but who showed up, always, in the way that counted. What it meant to build something that outlasted you, in architecture and in life. She didn't think of it as anything, or she tried not to. He was a colleague. She was pregnant and freshly single and not in any position to be anything other than what she already was. But she noticed things, the way he listened, fully, without the low-level distraction that characterized most people's listening. The way he never made her feel like she was too much, which was something she'd grown quietly used to managing. The way he had learned without being told that she needed silence from 8 to 8:15 and tea around 10, and didn't want to be asked if she was okay unless she clearly wasn't. She noticed and she did not act on what she noticed. She filed it away somewhere careful and went back to work. The Beaumont Commission was awarded to Carver and Lund in the 3rd week of November. There was a small celebration in the office, champagne for everyone else, sparkling cider in a champagne flute for Tessa, which was either thoughtful or slightly pointed, and she chose to take it as thoughtful. Her section lead, Patricia, different name needed. Her section lead, Gwen, made a brief speech and named Tessa specifically, which was not something Gwen did often. Tessa felt the warmth of it move through her, genuine and uncomplicated. James found her afterwards standing by the window with her cider. "You did this," he said, simply, not making a big thing of it. "We all did, Tessa." She looked at him. "You did this," he said again. She looked back out the window at the street below, the November dark already settled over the city, the lights of the Rideau Center reflecting on wet pavement. She was 27 weeks pregnant. She had built something she was proud of. She was going to be someone's mother. "James, yeah, I noticed things. About you. Over the past few months." She kept looking at the window. "I'm telling you because I think you should know, and because I'm not in a place to do anything about it, and because I've spent enough time in the last year not saying the things that needed to be said." Silence. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay? I noticed things, Tuki said. "I've been not doing anything about it for approximately the same amount of time, and for what it's worth, I'm not in a hurry." She turned to look at him then. He looked back at her with the same expression she'd seen outside her desk that morning in October. "Steady, honest, no performance in it. I'm going to be someone's mother in 12 weeks, she said. "I know that's a large thing to walk toward." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not walking away from it." She held that, let it be real for a moment before she did anything with it. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Her daughter was born on a February morning, 7.5 pounds, with a considerable amount of dark hair and an expression that the delivery nurse described as very opinionated, which Tessa took as a compliment. Her mom was there. Petra was there. Her dad drove up from Kingston and sat in the hallway because he couldn't manage hospitals but wanted to be close, and she loved him for that specific frank-shaped version of showing up. James was not there. That wasn't his place yet, and they both knew it. But when she texted him a photo that evening, her daughter's small face, the dark hair, one hand curled loosely open, he texted back within 2 minutes. "She's extraordinary, like her mother." She looked at that message for a moment and then set her phone face down on the bedside table and looked at her daughter, who was asleep on her chest, warm and improbably real. She named her Wren, small and particular and suited for perching somewhere unexpected. It took time. The right things usually do. James came to meet Wren when Wren was 3 weeks old, and he brought soup and didn't stay long and held her daughter with the careful competence of someone who had held babies before. A niece, it turned out, his sister's daughter in Vancouver. He sat across from Tessa on the couch she'd finally fully reclaimed as her own, and they talked quietly while Wren slept, and it was the most natural thing in the world, and also somehow enormous. By the time the ice broke on the canal that March, they had established a rhythm: dinners at her place when Wren was down, walks on the weekend with the stroller along the river path, an ease that had roots deep enough to hold. He was not trying to be something he wasn't. He was not performing patience or goodness. He just showed up consistently, in the specific ways that mattered, and after the year she'd had, she understood at a cellular level the difference between someone who said they'd be there and someone who simply was. She didn't think much about Damien anymore. She found out through mutual contacts eventually that the other woman had had her baby, a boy it seemed born around the time Wren was, and Tessa sat with that information for an evening and found to her own mild surprise that she felt nothing toxic about it. Just a kind of tired clarity. Whatever that had been, it was over. Whatever this was, Wren and James and the life she was actively building, it was just beginning. One evening in April, James was at her kitchen table, going through some drawings for a side project, while she nursed Wren in the chair by the window, the same chair where she'd stood that very first morning with her coffee, and her secret, and her hand flat against her stomach. The light was doing something particular, golden and low, the way it got in spring when it finally meant it again. Wren was making small sounds of contentment. James was sketching something in pencil and saying something about rooflines. The neighbor she still didn't know the name of was walking a dog she'd never seen before. The world was just going on. She looked at all of it, the ordinary fullness of it, and felt something settle inside her that had been unsettled for a very long time. She didn't need to name it. She already knew what it was.